Next speaker is Seth Pollack, an expert sarcoma specialist serving as the director of the sarcoma program at the Lurie Cancer Center and professor of cancer biology at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University. As a physician scientist, he is developing novel immunotherapies for patients with advanced sarcoma and leveraging unique features of sarcoma immunobiology to improve immunotherapy for all patients with cancer. So this year, we actually have two speakers speaking on the immune system and immunotherapy because they are such important topics, especially in sarcoma treatment. So Dr. Pollack, we're really looking forward to learning all that you have to share for us today. Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah, of course. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So, yeah, I wanted to just take a minute and say how much I really like the last talk. So many people are, I have to say, every single day people ask me about a new diet or about some new vitamin or something like that, that they are wondering if it could help their immune system. Um, and really, I haven't seen much of any of that sort of thing that I think really makes an impact. But I think the thing that I really do think makes an impact is exercise, like the last speaker was just talking about. And I really do encourage people to exercise. I think it's probably the best thing that you can do outside of your cancer treatment. But when I think about, the kinds of treatments that we give in oncology, I have this role as Stephen T. Rosen Professor of Cancer Biology. The main thing we always think about with cancer is, this is part of your body, but it's different than the rest of your body. How can we make a treatment that is going to be able to distinguish the cancer from the rest of your body? So the old way is chemotherapy, which basically distinguishes the cancer from the rest of your body by targeting rapidly dividing cells. So the fastest cells that are dividing in your body, how can we make a medicine that just kills those cells? And of course, that there's limiting toxicities for that, because your bone marrow that makes your blood is also one of the rapidly dividing cells. Your the cells that make your hair are also rapidly dividing cells. The cells that line your intestine are also rapidly dividing cells. So there's really limitations on this. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors like Votrient or cabozantinib or regorafenib, these are all medicines that maybe you've heard of before that we use for sarcoma. These are molecularly targeted agents. So molecularly targeted and tyrosine kinase inhibitors I would put together as, we have kind of used biology to try and go after the molecular pathways that we think are most different in cancer versus other cells. And that's where those treatments come from. And I think in certain cancers where there's really things are really driven by one molecular pathway, that can be a really effective strategy. And in sarcoma, there have been some of those, like, for example, in GIST is really driven by KIT, and we use a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, and it can be really effective. But most of our sarcomas are on a molecular level more complicated than that. And some of these targeted therapies haven't been, they have been successful, but not as successful as we would like. And then metabolic therapy, that's kind of how we divide the way cancer uses energy versus the way the rest of our body uses energy. That's something that I think is coming more into vogue. My lab has some projects, and that intersects with the immune system in some interesting ways. But that's something that's still really at the beginning. So, we're really interested in making the immune system target cancer. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mentioned something about this, in terms of vitamins and stuff like that. Next slide. So in terms of cancer, there's really two cells that are most important for how the immune system sees cancer. There's the B cells and the T cells. So B cells are the cells that make antibodies, and those antibodies are important in the cancer immune response. And we have therapies that where people make antibodies outside of the human, right? So in a lab, we can make antibodies and then infuse those antibodies to people. We don't have really any in sarcoma that are really good, but there are a number in clinical trials that seem promising, where they take an antibody and they don't just use the antibody on its own, but they link the antibody to a potent poison, and that way the poison can like accumulate in the tumor, because the antibodies get secreted by B cells and then they bind to the cancer. T cells are a different type of cell, and I'm going to say a little bit more about how T cells recognize cancer. Next slide. These are some of the other cells that are important for the immune system, and I just want to kind of make a note about them. Monocytes are the cells that are most important in fighting bacteria infections, and neutrophils are a type of monocytes, which you may know about. Neutrophils are kind of right below them, and these are the cells that are most important for bacteria. They do have a little bit of an impact on the cancer, but people all ask me all the time, oh, the chemotherapy has made me neutropenic. Will that impact my ability to fight the cancer? And it really not. Those neutrophils don't have an important, they have a role, but they don't have an important role in fighting the cancer. What's more important is probably the macrophages. Macrophages are they're really big cells on the microscopic scale. They're like as big as several cancer cells and other immune cells combined. They eat up dead tissues. So for example, if you have a wound and it's healing and there's scar tissues, the macrophages come in and they clean up the debris. They also can have a really important role in telling the other parts of the immune system what to do. So if the macrophages say, hey, we need a lot of immune cells here, we need T cells, they can send signals that call in T cells. Whereas if they want to tell the rest of the immune system that nothing's going on here and that we should just let this wound, that this is like a wound and we want it to heal, they can send out those signals. And a lot of sarcomas are very infiltrated by macrophages that we think are actually telling the rest of the immune system to go away. And a lot of the new immune therapies that I think are going to be on the horizon are really trying to tell these macrophages to shift, and instead of telling the immune system to go away, to tell the immune system to come into the tumor. Dendritic cells are another really important part of the immune system. They can be both in the tumor, but they can also be outside of the tumor in the lymph nodes. And the dendritic cells are most important for telling the B cells and the T cells what it is specifically about the cancer that they should be on the lookout for, because the cancer is always trying to trick the body into thinking that it's just another part of the body. But the dendritic cells are really the part that is guiding the T cells and telling the B cells, no, look, if you see this, this is something you need to watch out for. This is cancer. And then natural killer cells, we don't have good treatments using natural killer cells right now. But I do think that is something that is on the horizon. That's something that our lab is working on. We have a big collaboration with a natural killer cell expert to try and make natural killer cells target sarcoma. And I think that will be important in the future. Next slide. And this is just to say that, it's easy to kind of talk about the different cell types in a vacuum, but what really happens in the tumor is that you have the tumor is not just simple collection of tumor cells. The tumor is, if you're on the microscopic level, the tumor is a microenvironment that's filled with hundreds and hundreds of different cell types, including blood vessels, including all these different immune cells, including the tumor cells themselves, including both immune cells that are trying to fight the cancer, as well as other immune cells that have been tricked by the cancer into telling the other immune cells to go away. And that's the complex tumor immune microenvironment. Next slide. And, I know Bree is going to talk a lot about this, but, there's so many, even though there's only a few immunotherapies that are, ready for prime time, FDA approved, standard of care in the clinic, there are a lot of different immunotherapies that are on the horizon that are showing initial signals of activity, and that I think will be important for sarcoma in the future. We can go to the next slide. Something's wrong with the images, but we can go to the next slide. I am seeing, okay.
Yes, someone is screen sharing.
Oh.
Audrey Dylan Simons, can you?
Oh, did we skip one? Maybe let's just go back one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to make a comment on cell therapy, and I know that there's not a lot of time, so I'm gonna try and I might try and like just hop through a couple of these, but cell therapy is a really important emerging type of immunotherapy. So the question, the idea is that we want to take T cells, usually T cells, it could be any type of cell, natural killer cells or whatever, but usually we're talking about T cells, and we want to grow them and infuse them in a way so that they're going to fight the cancer. And there's, of course, the FDA approved one was just for synovial sarcoma, but there are other cell therapies in the clinic that are FDA approved for other types of cancer. And our hope, of course, is to get them into sarcoma. Next slide. One of these that are really interesting to me is tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. This is, so, I don't know, one interesting way that people are doing cell therapy is whether it be the T cell receptor therapy that you may have heard about in synovial sarcoma that was FDA approved, or CAR T cells in lymphoma, which are one of the biggest blockbuster events in modern science. This is something where people who were super refractory, had been through a million different lines of chemotherapy, who were really on at the end, and this new treatment came out, and it's like boom, people are being cured or all their diseases going away. That's CAR T cell therapy for leukemia, and that's for a specific type of leukemia, and it's also effective for a lot of different types of lymphoma. In those different types of treatment, the goal is to take a T cell that's really healthy, that's ready to kill something that doesn't belong there, and you're going to gene engineer it in a way where it'll recognize the cancer. But this can be very hard because it means that you have to have a good target on the sarcoma that it's going to be able to find. You have to infuse the T cells, and then they have to find their way to the tumor. Then they have to overcome all that stuff in the tumor microenvironment and kill them. So one thing that has worked in melanoma that we'd like to figure out how to make it work in sarcoma is if you take T cells that are already inside the tumor, these are T cells that for whatever reason, they're there for a reason, maybe because they recognize the tumor, hopefully. And they've already shown that they have the ability to find the tumor. So what if you just take some tumor out and you grow those T cells in the lab and you infuse them back to the patient? That's tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. That's a treatment that's FDA approved for melanoma. And there are companies trying to gene engineer the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes to make them work better. All kinds of things you can imagine. Okay, next slide. Oh, so one thing that I think is a common misconception, people are calling every type of T cell therapy CAR T cells, and that's not really, I know what you mean, but it's not actually technically accurate, right? So there's two types of commonly used gene engineered T cells, the T cell receptor and a CAR T cell. A T cell receptor is the natural way that a T cell recognizes its target in the body. So, and I always think about it because even though I think in the more modern evolutionary scale, I think there is T cell receptors that are, meant to fight cancer. But, if you go way back in evolution to when the immune system was first developing, these really developed to fight viruses. And what viruses do is viruses get into the cell and try and co-opt the machinery of the cell. And they have a few irregular proteins that get presented on the cell surface. And there's a molecule on the cell surface called MHC, or sometimes it's also called HLA. And what it's doing is it's constantly taking things inside the cell and showing them to the immune system and saying, look, everything is all right in here because you could see this protein, and this is a normal, healthy looking protein. And please, Mr. Immune System, sometimes I think about the immune system like the policeman or like the military or something around like that, going around and checking that everything is okay, and then they see it and it's like they're, okay, your badge is good, you can go on. But if something is abnormal, it gets presented and then the T cell sees it and then it kills it. And it's sometimes people ask me, well, why do these T cell therapies need to have HLA AO201? I don't know if you've heard about that, but the synovial sarcoma, a lot of synovial sarcoma patients become very frustrated because there's this FDA approved treatment for synovial sarcoma with a TCR therapy, and it's a really great treatment, but a lot of people can't get it because it's only for what's called HLA AO201. You may have heard about that. And that is not to do with the T cell, that's actually to do with this MHC. If you see the black scoop thing that's showing that blue dot is like part of the tumor specific protein, and it's being shown by MHC. And MHC is different if you have HLA AO201. There's a million different types of HLA. Everybody has one, but the most common one is HLA AO201 in America. And that's why the company developed it for HLA AO201. Every TCR therapy will be attached to a specific HLA, not necessarily HLA AO201, but that's what this first one was done just because of the commercial interests. A CAR T cell is something different. A CAR T cell is it doesn't use HLA because it's something specific for a tumor cell surface protein. So it needs to see something on the surface of the cancer. And you can see what it is it's actually they've engineered the outside of an antibody to work with the internal machinery of the T cell receptor. And this will see something on the cell surface of the cancer to signal the T cell to kill whatever's inside. Okay, and there are T cells that are being explored in sarcoma. And this is just an example of how amazing CAR T cells can be. This is a lymphoma patient, not sarcoma, and you can see all these yellow spots disappearing. Next one. Just some data for how well the MAGE-A4 TCR is working in synovial sarcoma. Next slide. Um, you know, I know Bree is going to talk a bunch about checkpoint inhibitors. And I do want to keep us on schedule. I know that the next talk is for 12:10, and it looks like there may be a bunch of questions. So I was thinking maybe we just stop here because I think that Bree is going to talk a lot about checkpoint inhibitors. So these are PD-1, I'll give you a plug for, our own trial. We have a massive phase 3 trial that has just started for undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma and related sarcomas using chemotherapy and immunotherapy together. So checkpoint inhibitors includes the PD-1 inhibitors, that's like pembrolizumab or nivolumab, and also the CTLA-4 inhibitors like ipilimumab, and also the wide variety of emerging checkpoint inhibitors. So a checkpoint inhibitor is anything that takes the brake off the T cells. And I'm happy to answer questions about that as well. But I see there's some questions
Yes.
in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Pollack. Do you want me to read the questions for you, or whatever you prefer? Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Okay, so first is what immunotherapy for clear cell sarcoma? Yeah, I mean, clear cell sarcoma is one of the really tough immunotherapies. I have actually personally seen a patient with clear cell sarcoma um, respond to a PD-1 inhibitor. So it can happen. There is not so much data, and I've also seen clear cell sarcoma patients who have not responded to checkpoint inhibitors. I do think if you have somebody who has been on some different sarcoma treatments and you're getting frustrated that nothing's working, because immunotherapy is generally well tolerated, I do think it would be worthwhile to try a checkpoint inhibitor for this patient with advanced clear cell sarcoma, who's resistant to some of the more common ways that you treat. So somebody asked me the trial at Northwestern. We do have some trials. So this is actually a national trial that you should be able to see at around the country. It's going to be open in lots and lots of different places. It's already open in many places. But yeah, that is for somebody who's not been on immunotherapy before. And it also uses doxorubicin. So this is really, for most people, it'll be one of the first treatments that you get. For synovial sarcoma, so the question is, should it be used before chemotherapy and surgery? No. Right now, we are only recommending it for somebody who has advanced disease that has spread. I am interested in the world in the future where we can try using therapies like this before surgery to try and improve people's chance of cure. But that is that's still in the future. For desmoplastic small round cell tumor, there is, I would say, first, I would say something similar to what I said about clear cell sarcoma, that I think it's worth a try if you have been through a lot of different treatments. I do think it's worth it to try immunotherapy. There's a great researcher at Memorial Sloan Kettering named Lauren Banks, who is who has made some T cells that I do think may be good in the future for desmoplastic small round cell tumor, specifically targeting the fusion protein that is driving desmoplastic small round cell tumor. So I think there are some things that that may be good in the future. For uterine leiomyosarcoma.
Dr. Pollack, sorry,
Oh yeah,
excuse me. Just to stay on schedule, are you able to answer some of these in the chat? And we're
yeah,
gonna
sure, absolutely,
get
yeah.
on. Okay, thank you so much for that great talk. Really appreciate it.